Hi everyone, my name is Jessie and I will be taking you through my analysis of the New York City restaurant inspection results found in the New York City Open Data website. Basically, the reason why I chose this topic was because I'm a food fighter, but I also like knowing that my food is clean. So I wanted to know exactly how clean it is and what are the chances that I'm going to regret the food that I eat tomorrow. So first, I started off with downloading all my data from the New York City Open Data website, and it ended up being something huge like this, and it was a lot of data that honestly was very overwhelming, but luckily I had a trusty tool from my Excel toolkit called the pivot table, in which you're able to break down all this data really quickly, really simply, instead of having to create your own sum functions or countif functions and all of those things, which would honestly take you days to go through all this. So first, I wanted to show you how I set up my pivot table. I moved my boroughs to rows so that I could see exactly how many there were, which are 5. And then the columns were for grades, and I set that as the count of grades as well, so that I could count exactly how many grades were A's, B's, C's, etc. for all the 5 boroughs. And even though this chart does make it quite easy to see what the total number is, you could visualize it a lot easier with my pivot chart in my dashboard right here. And you can see that Manhattan comes in first with the most amount of A's, followed by Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, and Staten Island. However, what if you wanted to see it a little bit more granularly, like per borough and the exact grade itself? Well, I created a nice little slicer here, which I love slicers because they're able to slice and dice the data even more granularly than a pivot table, but you're able to see it in the chart form. So if you go to Manhattan as the borough, and then if you go to a grade of B, you can see that it's a little bit over 8,000 restaurants that have a grade of B in Manhattan. So then, moving on to my second pivot table, I created one to find the top 5 critical flags by cuisine. So my row label is critical flags, and the sum values are also critical flags, so that I could see exactly how many were no's and yeses. And a critical flag, according to the New York City Open Data website data dictionary, is when a restaurant has a violation that could result in a foodborne illness. And there's actually a lot more cuisines that I have in the column section than what you actually see here, but I had filtered it to the top 10, which I filtered down lower to the top 5. And then you can see that it's American, cafes, Chinese, Latin, and pizza. So I wanted to visualize this again, so I made it into a nice little chart, and you can see here that American restaurants outnumber all the other cuisines in terms of the amount of critical flags raised. However, if you wanted to see other cuisines other than American, cafe, Chinese, Latin, or pizza, which are the top 5, I made a nice little slicer here where you can go to something like Mediterranean and you can see exactly how many have yes and no's in total for all 5 boroughs. And now moving on to my third graph from my dashboard, which is the critical flag by borough. I had created a pivot chart to see how many critical flags there were by borough. So I moved the rows to have the boroughs, and I moved the critical flags to count in the sum values field with critical flags in the columns, and I filtered here in the columns so I could only see yes, and then I filtered my row labels so I could only see the 5 boroughs because they actually have a 0 in the boroughs, which you can ignore because that has 0 values in there. I think it was just when the inspector put in a wrong field. And then, because this data is best visualized as a pie chart, as you can tell here, I thought it would be much better for me to call out the exact boroughs that I thought were interesting. And because I live in Queens, I found interestingly that it was at a 23% that it had, out of all the 5 boroughs, 23% of critical flags were in Queens. And then also, I wanted to be able to see if I could slice this with a slicer, and I was able to with the cuisine description. So if I wanted to see Filipino, you can see how many critical flags are by borough. So you can see after I sliced it to Filipino, the Queens critical flag borough jumped up massively to 64%. And that is how I use the slicer for my third graph. So moving on to my last and final pivot chart, I wanted to see the top 3 inspection types by borough because, you know, sometimes they just do inspections for before the restaurant opens, and then they do routine inspections. So I wanted to see exactly how many there were, if there were some that were falling through the cracks. So in this, I had the rows as inspection type, and then the count of inspection types in the sum values field, with the borough in the columns label, so that I could see exactly how many there were. And you can see the grand total over here. But there were a lot of inspection types, so I decided to pick the top 3 over here to filter to the top 3 because I didn't want to overwhelm my graph with 1,000 bars and then you wouldn't be able to see the exact data values. So the most popular inspection type actually is the cycle inspection, the initial inspection, which makes me feel good because before a restaurant opens you should always know that your food is safe. And in there, Manhattan wins with the most amount of inspections in the cycle inspection, initial inspection. But I wanted to see exactly how many of those inspections resulted in a good grade. So I made my last slicer here by grades. And you can select A, and you can see in the cycle inspection and all the other top 3 types of inspections by borough, how many resulted in a grade of A. Now the reason why I wanted to do this analysis was to find out exactly how clean my food was. And through my analysis I found that it really depends on where you go, what cuisine you get. So naturally, living in Queens, I'm most curious about the food that I get in Queens. So let's use my slicers to find out exactly how clean my food is. From my first dashboard, you can see the grade by borough, and let's see how many have C's. That is over 1,500 restaurants with a grade of C. And let's say that I like Chinese food. So let's see how many of these Chinese restaurants have critical flags in my second dashboard graph. And that is over 20,000 Chinese restaurants that have it. But let's see by borough how many of these tend to be Chinese that takes the cake by critical flag. And that's 31% of Chinese restaurants in Queens happens to have a critical flag, which takes the cake over all the other 5 boroughs. So, in conclusion, when I made this dashboard, it was really my way of seeing how clean my food is and the chances of me catching a foodborne illness, and even though I love being a food fighter, how much risk I'm taking with my food. I would say, yes, there is risk and it depends on the cuisine that you have, but if you love food, you should just go for it. So thank you for your time, and this was my analysis of the New York City restaurant inspection results from the New York City Open Data website.